Hello and welcome to the KPI Institute's webinar, The Reality of Using OKRs in Different Environments. My name is Andrei Kostea and I will be your host for today along with our presenter Alina Mirtoiu. This webinar is part of a series of free educational materials that aim to enhance the knowledge and know-how of those interested, while also creating a bridge between us as a company and you, our public. The KPI Institute is a research organization specialized in business performance. It operates research programs in 12 practice domains, each linked to a certification course, ranging from strategy and KPIs to employee performance, and from customer service to innovation performance. Today, 15 years after the KPI Institute was created, we can proudly say that our products and services have reached professionals on 5 continents, and that our public comprises a worldwide community of around 84,000 members online and 30,000 registered companies on smartkpis.com. In today's webinar, we will be looking to answer 2 primary questions: if companies should make use of the OKR system, and how should they do it if they have different organizational cultures. The presentation will be delivered by Alina Mirtoiu, Senior Management Consultant within the KPI Institute. She is certified in KPIs and performance management as well as in OKRs and has delivered over 350 hours of training and consulting this year alone. Alina's recent focus on research and consulting in the field of strategy, execution, and performance management has enabled the KPI Institute to develop its very own OKRs-related products and services. In addition to this, Alina frequently writes research-based articles for Performance Magazine, the KPI Institute's online magazine dedicated to strategy and performance. Her academic qualifications are in the field of administration, and she is currently a PhD candidate researching performance management for advocacy campaigns. This presentation lasts between 30 and 40 minutes. Please feel free to ask any questions you might have during the webinar, as they will be answered at the end of the presentation in our Q&A session. Enjoy the KPI Institute's webinar, The Reality of Using OKRs in Different Environments. Now, I would like to invite Alina to begin her presentation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Andrei, for your nice presentation as well. This is Alina Mirtoiu, and as Andrei mentioned, we will be discussing about how or if OKRs can be implemented in different organizational contexts than the already notorious one, which is IT or very creative or innovative organizations. I propose to start with a short introduction in OKRs. Although I'm sure that most professionals these days have already heard about OKRs and have an understanding about it, and then discuss some of the main setting rules when it comes to OKR implementation. Now, the third part, which is the most important part of today's webinar, we will discuss how these rules can be, or if they apply to different organizational environments. During the session, I would like us to understand better the concept of OKR, to discover the key rules in setting OKRs, as well as to comprehend how OKRs can be implemented in diverse contexts. Before we get started, Andrea, I would like you to start the poll, and I would really like to get to know your experience in using OKRs. So please answer the poll on the screen. If you consider, or if you currently use OKRs in your organization, or consider that you have experienced OKRs implementation before. I think about 30 seconds should be enough for everyone to answer. And please do answer, because I am very interested to see what audience we have today. Now, let's start with what are OKRs before we get the answer to our polls. The OKR, as everyone knows, is a goal management framework which derives from management by objectives. It was popularized in about 1999, when, of course, it started to be used in Google, and it contains a maximum of 5 objectives and 5 key results for each objective. Now, it's usually recommended to use between 3 to 5, And this framework is striving to create a link between the vision or the strategy of the organization and the reality. In other words, to give the employees a sense of purpose and belonging by understanding how their activities influence the strategic goals of the organization. Each OKR should be supported by an initiative which basically describes how the key result will be achieved. Now, as already mentioned, they derive from management by objective and are mostly linked to innovative companies or IT companies. But now the focus has actually shifted, and more companies from other fields, including governmental organizations, want to use OKRs to increase their alignment or flexibility. Now let's go back to our poll, and as I can see, most of our respondents said they haven't used OKRs or are not implemented in their organizations, while 30% are saying that they are using it, but it's not properly implemented. We will discuss about how to properly implement it, or of course, as much as we have the time limit, but we will discuss a bit how to implement OKRs and if we can implement it properly in certain organizations. So in large, this is what OKRs are. We said that just to make a short comment on the actual name, objectives tell us where we want to go. Initiatives tell us or measure our progress and if we got where we wanted to go. And initiatives tell us what we are going to do in order to get there. And let's take an example. The objective here, if you see, this is for the HR department, is to optimize recruitment. Now, key result, we said we can have between 3 to 5. I chose an example with only 3 key results. We have key result 1, which is 10 career day workshops conducted. As you can see, we have a number. And we also know what we are going to do in order to optimize our recruitment. Then, as a key result number 2, we have 1 open door day organized with a minimum of 100 participants. So here we have basically 2 measurements. One is organizing 1 open door day, and the other one is to have at least 100 participants in that event. And as a third key result, we have 80% of the CVs received to be relevant for the job that we posted. Now, we can move on to our second part of the webinar. This was just a brief introduction, and it's OKR setting rules. Out of all the OKR setting rules, we have selected for this webinar those that will be challenging for less innovative or less dynamic organization, but the list is longer than the 5 that we are going to present. So let's take them one by one. The first one, as you can already see on the screen, is OKRs should be aligned across the organization, but never cascaded. This means each individual should make sure to set OKRs that influence other organizational levels and indeed help the organization achieve its goals, but not copy from the upper level OKRs. Following on this, the methodology states that OKRs should be aligned bottom up and sideways, but never top down. So to make it more clear, employees or departments should be given the bigger picture, the main goals of the organization, but also be allowed to set their own OKRs depending on their capabilities and interdependencies with other employees or departments. The theory also states that OKRs should be changed quarterly. And this setting process should be basically going on and on each quarter in order to increase the flexibility. In this way, every department, team, or employee gets to question themselves at the end of each quarter regarding what they need to focus on during the next quarter, and make sure that the measurement of their work includes all the changes in the strategy or in the environment that it's needed for the organization to move forward. Also, according to the theory, we need to use more aspirational objective. Hence, employees should consider inspirational, higher risk, or more innovative objectives that create an impact even outside the day-to-day activities. These objectives should be challenging to achieve, but they shouldn't trigger negative repercussions if they are not fully achieved. Also, the key results should focus on measuring the impact, not just the result of certain activities. Of course, if we look at these rules, they seem quite straightforward. And this is actually a plus of the OKR system because it aims to be easy to understand and implement. However, as we know, the realities of most organizations are very, very different than what sounds good on paper. They require a certain degree of customization, and this is something we face even with a more or an easier or less subjective performance measurement system, such as the KPI-based one. It still requires a customization. You still need to take into consideration particularities of the environment in order to make sure that when you measure, you do encompass the specificity of each context. Before we go further, I would like to take a few minutes to focus a bit on understanding how we are going to cluster organizations for the next part of the webinar. We are not going to focus on functional areas or industries, but it will be done based on structure. An organizational structure is usually defined as a system that outlines how certain activities are directed in order to achieve the goal of the organization. These activities usually include rules, roles, responsibilities, and the organizational structure usually determines how information flows within different levels within different levels of the organization. Basically, the chain of command, the communication style, even the approval levels, and so on. Mintzberg differentiated between 5 types of organizational structure. The first one was entrepreneurial and has a very loose organizational structure with poor task discipline. This is usually applicable to grassroots projects or companies that are barely starting. The second one was machine, which is a highly bureaucratic organization, usually applicable to governmental entities. The third is professional, which has a similar level of bureaucracy to the machine type, the one mentioned before, but it is characterized by a high degree of professional and competent workers. So here we have bureaucracy, but we have a lot of competent people. In the fourth, the divisional one, we have usually this organizational structure is most common in large corporation. It has multiple business units or product lines and has a very centralized control. Then the last one, the fifth one, is innovative, which has a more decentralized decision-making process. And if you think about today's situation, it probably reflects research institutes or mostly IT companies and maybe even design or very innovative companies that need to bring new products on the market, and so on. If we think about these 5 types, the first and the last are mainly less structured, while the middle 3 have a very, very structured and centralized approach. As we said, here we can have the government, we can have organizations that are made by professional or are specialized on a certain thing, and also we can have large corporations. Going back to the OKR rules that we've discussed previously, they apply very well in a very creative and less structured organization. Think about it. You don't have to wait for your superior to tell you what you have to measure or what you have to do, because you have your own field, you can innovate, you can come up with new ideas by yourself. But in a very structured organization, how are you going to not cascade anything, since you're not really able to innovate a lot? You're not really able to come up with new ideas by yourself. You have to wait for your superior to tell you. At the same time, I know OKRs are a very hot topic and they are perceived as silver bullet, but at the same time, you don't necessarily only have to follow these rules, because it's also important to find a balance between the structure of the organization where you are going to implement OKRs and the performance management system that you use, which is in this case objectives and key results, in order to actually be able to create a comprehensive system that enables you to achieve your goals. Otherwise, you are going to build a system where everyone gets to be creative or innovative or set their own measurements, but those measurements don't matter because they do very different things. They do what their managers tell them, not what they wanted to do or how they wanted to bring value to the organization. So in this case, setting OKRs, it's not going to bring any difference, and probably it's going to do more harm to the organization, because people will end up frustrated because they don't get to work on their OKRs at all. So let's take those rules one by one again and see if or how they can be customized to fit more structured organization. So if we remember, the structured one were the 3 in the middle, according to Mintzberg. So first one was OKRs should not be cascaded. Of course, the OKR system states objectives and key results should not be cascaded, but each functional area, department, or individual, no matter how many layers you have in the organization, should develop their own OKRs, which contribute to the achievement of the overall goals or the organizational OKRs. This sounds very good on paper, but in practice, it's actually a bit harder to do so, especially in the case of a very, very hierarchical environment. Imagine you work for a governmental entity. There, the focus is for the employees to do what they are asked or what they have to do, very repetitive work. And decision makers usually get to say what is going to be changed, what's not going to be changed, and what should an employee do during a year, a quarter, whatever the time frame. Furthermore, in some organization, or actually in most organization, a lot of the strategic goals need to be actioned upon by multiple departments or individuals. So it's going to be very hard to say that none of the OKRs can be cascaded, since some of them actually need to be taken by some individuals and worked upon. Of course, this case only applies to a limited number of objectives, but I think in practice, there will be the case in which this theoretical statement will not apply, and you will have OKRs that are going to be transferred by your managers, by your CEO to a certain department. as they are. For example, if your organization is now starting, and the focus of the organization is to be established and have everyone hired and in place and trained by, let's say, the end of the year. Now, if you want to do this, this should be cascaded towards probably the HR, who needs to hire a lot of people, or to the training team, who needs to train those people, or to the managers, who need to train them for the actual job those people need to do. So that OKR, you cannot say, I choose to align myself to that or not. It's going to be on your OKRs if you are the HR manager or the HR person. I think one thing that can help will be to map the organizational requirements and the business as usual beforehand. And this will help employees to actually know what they are expected to deliver 100%, and then help them choose what else they can do in order to help and innovate. Let's take the second rule. That one was that OKRs should be set bottom up or even sideways, but never top down. Now, although this is very similar to the first point, since top-down approach is associated usually with the process of cascading, this second rule emphasizes on the idea that employees should be actively involved, if not the leads, in the OKR setting process. The OKR is trying to be very, let's say, very democratic process where the employees can understand where the organization wants to go, and then they can align themselves to that. This is the process in a IT company. So they know where the organization wants to go, and they know what they can help with. However, in very structured organizations, you don't really have the opportunity to allow employees to always do this, because usually, as we said, the chain of command is clearer and they have to listen to their managers. So maybe sometimes they cannot be the leads in the OKR setting process, and most of their OKRs will come from their managers, but at least be allowed to participate more than in the KPI case. Even if, again, in some cases, we are not going to follow the prescription of OKRs just as it is. Now, additionally, a common practice that is followed, but it's not necessarily in the OKR rules, is to take the key result of the higher level. For example, if you're an employee, you are going to take the key result of your team's OKRs and make it your objective if you are going to be able to work on that. I think even though it's not a by the book approach, if you have a very structured organization, it is a way to ensure both the alignment that is needed in the OKR system to work, and also help employees understand where you want them to go. It might not feel as permissive as the OKR approach, but the importance of this guideline, that OKRs should be set bottom up or sideways, is to make sure that you stimulate communication between different employees or different departments in order for them to align their focus on what is important for the organization, and avoid a scenario in which teams, departments, or individuals work on their own metrics or targets instead of working together to create value for the organization as a whole. So besides the sideways communication, clearly communicating the organizational goals or the one-year objectives will enable departments or employees to fully align with the organization and make sure they work together towards achieving the higher goals. So even though you might not follow this prescription, if you don't allow the employees to come up with their own objectives and key results, make sure that you set some, let's say, a clear path for them to go, but you also allow them a bit of flexibility. For example, if most of their OKRs come from the higher level, allow them one OKR that is more innovative or that comes from their own ideas. And I was working with the company, and I really like this this example for how we can set bottom-up OKRs, but also make sure that people in a very structured organization follow what they have to do. It was a governmental entity, and the lady was working in procurement. Now, procurement is a very regulated process, very clear process. You don't have much work for innovation. And most of the people in her team chose to have very similar individual OKRs. But this one lady said that she wanted to add one innovative OKR, which was to implement in the team a e-platform for creating the purchase orders. And that was something she felt was missing in her department, and she didn't necessarily only wanted to follow the prescription, but was also an OKR that would help her organization and her team as well. So it wasn't something that she wanted to do in her spare time, but it was something related to the work job. Now, so far we had OKRs should be aligned across the organization but never cascaded, and OKRs should be set bottom up and sideways but never top down. The third one is that OKRs need to be changed quarterly. And while this can be true when we discuss aspirational OKRs, because at least in theory, most of them should be, but because you get to change the key results, and let's say each quarter you work on that OKR and the status changes, then you get to change at least the key results quarterly. However, if you think about an organization, most of the objectives are not going to be aspirational, because most of the people will still have to do the job they were hired to do, and most of us have business as usual activities and a process or procedures to follow. Employees, as we said, still have to do their business, still have to do what they were hired for. And this is the reality in most of the organizations, that objectives, probably 90% of them will be committed. That means they are directly linked with the operations. Hence, most of these objectives will probably remain the same or very similar for more quarters in a row, and will only change when needed. If you think about, let's say, the HR, if you work in HR and you have to hire people every month, probably every single quarter you will have an OKR related to recruitment if that's your main job. If you work in, as I was giving you the example earlier, in procurement, and you have a very clear process and procedure, you will probably have to follow the same thing over and over again. And since that's your main job, then you will probably have to have at least one or two OKRs related to the main job. Now, I think in this case, although again it's something that works better in innovative or project-based operations, it's going to be very hard for governmental entities or structured organization with very specific rules to change their OKRs quarterly. But what they can do is at least make sure they refresh them. This can be a rule that doesn't apply to you in all cases, and probably, again, it's not a by the book approach, but at least make sure that your employees are going to check if their OKRs are still relevant every single quarter, and see if maybe they find something that can be changed or something that can be innovative to add. As for the next one, we said objectives should be aspirational. Again, we discussed under the last point that not in a normal organization, you won't be able to have only aspirational objectives. Of course, the higher the number of aspirational objectives, the higher the number the changes or reviews, since they will be focused on improvement rather than business as usual. And the recommended ratio is somewhere between 70% committed and 30% aspirational OKRs. But that's in the case of innovative or IT or project-based organizations. In the case of structured companies, you will probably, or in the case of support functions, you will probably have less aspirational OKRs and more committed ones. Now, again, this goes not in line with the OKR strategy or the OKR prescription, if you may, but it's still something that is going to happen. And I think organizations at least need to, let's say, inspire their employees to take some risk-oriented objectives and also give them the flexibility to work on those. One of the recommendations we usually have is that if employees don't have the willingness to come up with their own aspirational OKRs, to have the team lead or the head of the department choose an aspirational OKR for the whole team and help them or encourage them to all participate with something in achieving that objective. Again, with the aspirational objective, even if they're not fully completed, it's still good because they are risk-taking and very inspirational objectives. And now the last part is, or we were saying that is, that key results should measure outcomes. Now, the outcome is basically the impact. So we don't want to measure only the result of day-to-day operations, but we also want to measure the impact. However, key results should be something that is in the power of the employee or in the power of the department. So theoretically, we should be able to measure the impact of the certain employee, not the task itself. And if it's easier to do this with aspirational OKRs, it's going to be very hard to do it when we go back to support functions, very repetitive or low impact tasks. Considering, let's say, accounts payable, and you have a person that is responsible for logging the invoices in the system. That is fairly repetitive, and their day-to-day work is to make sure that all the invoices are logged in the system and in a certain time frame, of course, and also 100% correct information is written there. Now you can imagine it's very, very hard to measure the impact of such a task. And especially that because that employee doesn't have control on the impact of their actions. He can only do the limited task of entering those particular information into the system. Now, again, although it is recommended to have several outcome-oriented key results, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have, but managers especially, when they present OKRs to their people, should know if they can measure the outcome of their tasks or they should only stick to the results. I know, again, it goes more or less against the pure theoretical mindset, but it's still something we need to consider when it comes to certain areas of our organization. And think about the fact that an average employee should have between 9 to 25 key results. Of course, none of us are going to be able to write only outcomes and measure only the outcome, but we are going to also measure some results there. So if you think about it, the two type of organizations, the very structured one and the very unstructured one, they do have some similarities in terms of even in a very innovative or creative organization, not all key results can be measured as outcome, and you won't be able to only align bottom up. You still need to take something from the organization because someone has to action upon that. The difference is that most of their OKRs in an innovative company will probably be changed quarterly, and the number of aspirational objectives are going to be higher. I know that most of the professionals have created this idea OKRs that they can solve any issue if implemented correctly. But correctly in most cases doesn't mean by the book. It refers to something that fits to the organizational context. It refers to something that takes into consideration how repetitive the tasks are, what type of activities most employees have to do, their level of engagement, because that is also very important. And as John Doerr used to say, OKRs should go hand in hand with good execution, sound judgment, strong leadership, or a creative workplace culture. Otherwise, you are just going to force a type of performance management in an organization that is not going to work and maybe just frustrate or bring something even more negative than before, or make employees less satisfied with the workplace. So I think proper implementation in this case requires much more, let's say, much more customization than in the case of a more straightforward performance management system, or let's say the original ones. Just to review a second, we were saying that OKRs are a goal management framework that are based usually on stretch goals or aspirational goals. They aim to link the individual ambitions with the strategy of the organization. So make sure that people know how to or what to do in order to reach to organizational goals. OKRs should be customized based on the organizational needs, and very structured organization might actually need a hybrid system between OKRs and KPIs, where KPIs measure the day-to-day operations, the ones that we were saying are committed OKRs, and OKRs just measure the value employees bring, their innovations, the changes they propose. this is it from my side, and now I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Alina, for your presentation. As Alina has noted, if anyone has any queries of any kind, please feel free to address them now. So we've received the first questions. How exactly can we best link OKRs to dashboard indicators? If you have a few words on this.
Well, in theory at least, we should only use OKRs and not necessarily dashboards. But I think the easiest way to link dashboards to the OKRs is to make sure that the employees knows the dashboard. They are familiar with what is expected from them or what they have to do based on the measurements, and then come up with either with innovative ideas. So just as we said, the hybrid system. So we have the metrics that measure the business as usual, and we have the OKRs that only measure the added value or the innovation part.
All right.
But as I was saying, in theory, you shouldn't necessarily, you should either have dashboards with metrics and KPIs or OKRs. I
Now,
know that in practice,
yeah,
things
go
could be
ahead.
different. Sorry, Andre.
So we've received a second question based on what you shared with us earlier. From the point of view of a structured organization, would you say that OKRs are mainly good for strategic objectives and then KPIs are mainly good for operational objectives?
Yes and no. I mean, I can see your point where OKRs could be the higher level aspirational ones, and KPIs can measure more or less the achievement of those higher level objectives. But I think OKRs, as I was telling you earlier, can also be used at other levels, but you are going to have more committed OKRs. So don't expect to have a lot of aspirational objectives at lower levels. It will be aspirational objectives on top and more committed objectives and key results that go towards that on the bottom. So you can use an OKR system through all the levels, but going further down on the organizational chart, you will find yourself that the OKRs are very similar to the KPIs. Hope this answers your question.
We've got a couple of more minutes for one more question, if anyone would like to ask. So we've received one more question, and I know this one would require a more in-depth answer, but on a very broad level, could you tell us the big differences between KPIs and OKRs?
Well, the big difference, and I think the main one, is the fact that OKRs allow for more flexibility. So they, at least in a theoretical way, they force you to change them quarterly, or at least ask yourself if they are still relevant. So whether KPIs, you just gather data, and if you don't have um, more data for, let's say, a longer period of time, it's going to be very harder for people to actually get some insight. So for KPIs, you need a longer period of time, while the OKRs are focused on, let's say, a period of time which is quarterly, or that's what they recommend. And then you still have to look and refocus, basically. A second one is the communication. It's often the case with the KPIs that they come from your management. They tell you what they're going to measure. They give you the targets, and there's no question asked. And you don't necessarily have to communicate with other departments in order to establish the KPIs. You don't have to ask how you can work together in order to achieve some KPIs that are in your scorecard or in the other department's scorecard. However, with OKRs, when you set the OKRs, you have to look at the top, you have to look at your job description, and you also have to look at what other departments or employees have as their own OKRs in order for all of these pieces to align. So it's harder if you have an OKR system to say that each department is working towards their own direction, because they will be forced to communicate. Now, a key part of the OKR is that everyone's OKRs should be transparent, should be shared across the entire organization, from the CEO to the newest employee. So everyone can see what everyone is doing, what everyone is focusing on, and how they can align together. I know it sounds a bit complicated now, but when you put it on paper, it's easier, and that's why I actually recommended you earlier to map the work that has to be done and the day-to-day activities, because it's going to be easier to take that out of the picture. So basically, for me, these are the two main aspects that that OKRs bring extra from KPIs. There are several others, but these are the two key points. The fact that they are more flexible, they help communication. Also, one other thing is that OKRs should be discussed, or the progress of the OKR should be discussed with the manager at least once a week, or once 2 weeks. So that brings another layer of communication, which usually KPIs don't, until you have the final result and the manager comes and say, we need to improve this. While with OKRs, it's an ongoing communication on your progress and on how the organization can help you achieve your key results. So these are the two main for me.
All right, thank you very much for your answers. We have reached the end of our Q&A session and of our webinar. Alina, do you have any last words for our listeners?
Thank you very much for your attention. I do hope you have enjoyed your time with us today, and feel free to write any other questions that you have, or keep in touch if you want on LinkedIn or email. So looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much once again for your presentation.
Thank you.
The KPI Institute appreciates your interest in the webinar, The Reality of Using OKRs in Different Environments. Follow our websites and our social media channels to find out more details about our next webinars when they get posted. Also, if you are interested in getting a certification granted by the KPI Institute on vital areas within the performance management discipline, you can explore any of our scheduled courses on marketplace.kpiinstitute.org. Thank you once again for your participation. We wish you the best of performance and have a nice day.